Greetings. Hello to you all. I hope you are well. I am doing well. I hope we are progressing well with our course. I hope you are learning something from these presentations. I have received very valuable feedback from some of you, and that is also very encouraging. I encourage you to work very hard as we continue with our studies. Today, we are going to look at a topic called strategies in counterterrorism, our strategy at our level in Kenya. However, before we look at that, our strategy, we are first going to look at case studies. I decided to do some case studies so we can analyze how these things happen, how these attacks happen. And basing on these case studies, we are also going to learn a lot of information on how to investigate terrorism, on how to prevent terrorism, and what are the measures needed to prevent terrorism through these case studies. Now, we are going to start straight away, and we are going to see in the Kenyan scenario, you can recall from the assignment I gave you, I asked you to detail the attacks that have occurred in Kenya over time, and this is just a recap. So you can see, you remember the bus stop that was called OTC Nairobi, you remember Norfolk Hotel, you remember American Embassy Nairobi, which was the deadliest attack, and then you also remember Paradise Hotel Mombasa. You also remember some other attacks in Turkana, some other attacks in Mandera, and also in Garissa, you remember the school. And in recent times, that is not on this list, is actually the Westgate attack and the attack at Dusit D2, among others, other isolated attacks that did not have a major impact. However, this is just a reminder to you that the threat is real. Also, when you look at Kenya, you can see from the Kenyan map that nearly all areas of our republic have actually faced these scenarios. You can see Kisumu, you can see Nairobi, you can see Kajiado, you can see Tana River, Lamu, Mombasa, you can see Turkana, Mandera. These are some of the attacks that have actually occurred in our republic. And this tells us that we should not restrict our mind to only securing the critical facilities. We should also put our mind in the mindset that attacks can happen anywhere. You remember when we spoke about characteristics of terrorism, we said one characteristic is that terrorism can occur anywhere, it can target anybody, it can target any facility, it can target any organization. And also one of the characteristics is that it causes fear, it causes panic, and it causes death. It is a threatening, among other things, and property damage. Having said that, you can see that we as security professionals, we need to be very proactive. We need to be very, very proactive, ensure that we secure our republic. It is our responsibility. Al-Shabaab new tactic. You know, we face attacks mainly from the Al-Shabaab group from Somalia. The 2009 terrorist attack on Nairobi's Dusit D2 hotel and office complex, which killed 22 people, exposed a new tactic the Somali-based militant group Al-Shabaab had adopted on Kenyans. A new tactic. They are using a new tactic. And the new tactic is, unlike other terrorist attacks, the Westgate shopping mall in 2013, which killed 68, and the Garissa University in 2015, which claimed the lives of 148 people, mostly students, where foreign fighters were the ringleaders. The Dusit one had Kenyans as the main planners and executioners. So the Dusit attack is remarkably different from the other attacks because it had Kenyans as the main planners and Kenyans as the main attackers. That is something that we should take note of because we have always had the perception that These attacks are perpetrated by people from Somalia or Somali origin, and from foreign countries. But you can see the Lucidity, the tactics Al-Shabaab used is to recruit people within us, and then to have them plan the attack and to have them commit the act. Take note of that. And then the 1998 bombings as a case study. In 1998, suicide bombers drove their pickup trucks loaded with explosives to the American embassies in 2 East African cities. You know this one. At 10:30 a.m. local time, the first truck loaded with 2,000 pounds of TNT forced its way to the back entrance of the embassy in the busy downtown of Nairobi, Kenya. The deadly cargo would have exploded in the US Embassy basement had it not been for the Kenyan security guards and the US Marines manning the facility. Despite a grenade and firearm attack, the Kenyan guards and the US Marines prevented access to the building. The terrorists then detonated the bomb at the open gate to the embassy. I mentioned in a previous presentation that we are very lucky. Had they loaded these 2,000 pounds of TNT, had they drove the truck into the basement, then I think it would have been a disaster, a very major disaster for us. It would have been a very, very, very major disaster for us. So we can say congratulations to the guards who are manning the entrance and the Marines who are manning the entrance. They were able to prevent the terrorists from driving the truck into the basement. And that is your job as a security person. Remember, in security, you are on the front line. You are on the front line. I don't know how I can put it, but your life is always on the line. Your life is always on the line. And you can end up preventing an attack that can cause a lot of damage to people. And even if you die in the act, you will have saved a lot of lives, you will have saved a lot of damage. Remember, every day you are at work as a security officer. You are a supervisor, you are a manager, you are a security guard. You just remember your life is on the line. Even when you are not on duty, when you are traveling, when you are just within town, always keep in mind that your life is on the line. Please take note. The explosion reduced much of the interior of the embassy to rubble. The secondary fragmentation from flying glass, internal concrete block walls, furniture, and fixtures caused most of the embassy casualties. Most of the Kenyan casualties resulted from the collapse of the adjacent buildings located within a 2 to 3 block radius. The explosion was heard throughout the city center, and the vibrations were felt in most parts of Nairobi. Minutes later, a second truck exploded outside of the US Embassy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, causing extensive damage to the building. In total, the 2 bombings killed 224 people, including 12 Americans. Many thousands more were injured, most of whom were local citizens of the 2 African countries. The attacks had been planned years in advance. So when we talk about planning, we saw that terrorists take very many years to plan these attacks before they commit them. And we can actually be able to prevent these attacks if we can capture the planning phase, if we can be vigilant at our workplaces, if we can conduct a lot of surveillance, counter surveillance, if we can be observant, and if we can bring the information to our seniors, and if we can bring the information to the Kenyan forces, to the police, that we have a suspicious person we suspect could be planning to cause injuries to us. In the aftermath of the attacks, over 900 FBI agents alone and many more FBI employees traveled overseas to assist in the recovery of evidence and identification of victims at the bomb sites and to track down the perpetrators. Over 900 FBI agents. Investigating terrorism is very complex. Investigating terrorism is very, very complex. These attacks were soon directly linked to Al-Qaeda. Extraordinary efforts by the US and international partners led to the identification, arrest, and extradition to the United States of several members of the Al-Qaeda terrorist network for their role in the bombings. Mohammed Sadiq Ode and Mohammed Rashid Daoud of Al-Owal were arrested in Kenya within 20 days of the bombings and rendered to the US shortly thereafter. Both were convicted for their roles in the bombing and sentenced to life in prison in October 2001. On November 4, 1998, Osama bin Laden and several members of his network, including his military commander Mohammed Atef, were named in an indictment based on the investigation. Both have since been killed. All told, more than 20 people have been charged in connection with the bombings. 7 are serving life sentences in US prisons. Some photos from the damages of the attack. So we have to remember that I mentioned to you also during introduction that as a security professional, you should have these facts on your fingerprints. You should have these facts on your fingerprints so that even when people are discussing these things, you can also be heard. Don't be the type of security person who just sits there. Okay, it is good to sit and listen, but you have to participate in forums. You have to exchange ideas. When I was working in Kenya as a security manager, we used to go for a hotel security managers meetings. And during those meetings, you have at least to share your opinion and to share your ideas and to share your knowledge. That is how we grow. So learn about these things and keep them in mind. I don't think I'll say again because I've said that many times. Learn these things, study these things, and be a person who is aware of what is happening to us in terms of terrorism, in terms of other security incidents. Briefly, the rise of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. The attacks also earned bin Laden a place on the Federal Bureau of Investigation's 10 most wanted fugitives list. Less than 6 months later, bin Laden gave Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the principal architect of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, approval to plan the deadly attacks in New York and Washington. The successful embassy bombings marked a watershed in the evolution of the September 11th plot. You see how these things are linked? The successful embassy bombings marked a watershed in the evolution of the September 11th plot. The September 2013 terrorist attack in Kenya. In brief, on September 21, 2013, masked gunmen attacked the upscale Westgate shopping mall in Nairobi, Kenya, taking hostages and killing at least 67 people. Almost 200 people, including at least 5 US citizens, were wounded in the siege, which lasted 4 days. The attack is the deadliest terrorist incident in Kenya since the 1998 Al-Qaeda bombing of the US Embassy in Nairobi. A Somali Islamist insurgent group Al-Shabaab, which has ties to Al-Qaeda, claimed responsibility for the Westgate attack. The region's porous borders. 1 minute, please. A Somali Islamist insurgent group, Al-Shabaab, which has ties to Al-Qaeda, claimed responsibility for the Westgate attack. The region's porous borders, proximity to the Arabian Peninsula, weak law enforcement and judicial institutions, and pervasive corruption, combined with almost 20 years of state collapse in the neighboring Somalia, have provided an enabling environment for violent extremist groups. So if I ask you, why are we always a threat? Or why are we always facing terrorist attacks? Why is it possible? How is it possible for these people to access our country and commit these acts? You talk of porous borders, you talk of proximity to the Arabian Peninsula, you talk of weak law enforcement, you talk of judicial institutions, you talk of pervasive corruption, then you talk of the collapse of 20 years in neighboring Somalia. These have provided an enabling environment for these criminals to access our country and commit attacks. And we have done well. Our Kenyan forces have done really well. Over the years since we joined AMISOM and traveled to Somalia, we have dealt with these people in a very tough way, in a very, very, very tough way. You might not know. Only those guys who are in class, who are in the military, might know. But you, as a civilian, most civilians, we don't know as civilians because we are outside the military. But we have dealt with these people, and I like that. I like the way that we have really dealt with them. It is encouraging to see that we have the power and the strength and the courageous nature to defend our republic. That is how security people should think, that we are ready at all times to defend our republic. Look at Ukraine, how it is standing strong against Russia. I'm not taking any side, but just look at Ukraine, how the people are determined, to face Russia and to stand against it. You can see that's what you call determination. That is what we call patriotism. The Westgate Mall attack came almost 2 years after Kenya launched a military offensive. The Westgate Mall attack came almost 2 years after Kenya launched a military offensive across its northeastern border with Somalia, with the stated aim of defending itself against terrorist attacks and incursions by Al-Shabaab. Kenya subsequently joined the UN-mandated African Union AU Stabilization Mission, AMISOM, which is tasked with countering the threat posed by Al-Shabaab in Somalia. So I also want to mention that you have to remember that we are under threat forever. It will never change for us. We are under threat forever. So we have to keep that one in mind. And then United States. Let's look at case studies from the United States. We have looked at case studies in Kenya. Now let's look at case studies from the United States. Oklahoma City bombing. On the morning of April 19, 1995, an ex-army soldier and security guard named Timothy McVeigh parked a rented Ryder truck in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City. He was about to commit mass murder. Inside the vehicle was a powerful bomb made of a deadly cocktail of agricultural fertilizer, diesel fuel, and other chemicals. Take note of agricultural fertilizer, diesel fuel, and other chemicals. McVeigh got out, locked the door, and headed towards his getaway car. He ignited one timed fuse, then another. At precisely 9:02 a.m., the bomb exploded. Within moments, the surrounding area looked like a war zone. Fertilizers, diesel, and other chemicals. So inside the vehicle was a powerful bomb made of a deadly cocktail of agriculture, fertilizer, diesel fuel, and other chemicals. McVeigh got out of the car, locked the door, and he headed towards his getaway car. He ignited one timed fuse, then another. At precisely 9:02 a.m., the bomb exploded. Within moments, the surrounding area looked like a war zone. A third of the building had been reduced to rubble, with many floors flattened like pancakes. Dozens of cars were reduced to ashes, and more than 300 nearby buildings were damaged or destroyed. The human toll was still more devastating. 168 souls lost, including 19 children, with several hundred more injured. It was the worst act of homegrown terrorism in the United States history. Coming on the heels of the World Trade Center bombing in New York 2 years earlier, the media had many Americans immediately assumed that the attack was the handiwork of Middle Eastern terrorists. The FBI, meanwhile, quickly arrived at the scene and began supporting rescue efforts and investigating the facts. Beneath the pile of concrete and twisted steel were clues, and the FBI was determined to find them. It didn't take long. On April 20, the rear axle of the Ryder truck was located, which yielded a vehicle identification number that was traced to a body shop in Junction City, Kansas. Employees at the shop helped the FBI quickly put together a composite drawing of the man who had rented the van. Agents showed the drawing around town, and local hotel employees supplied a name. Tim McWay. You see how investigation happens? That is why I mentioned also that investigation is the work of the state operatives. You, as a security person in the private industry, you have a major role to play in counterterrorism. But when it comes to investigation, you can only give witness account, what you saw or what you witnessed and whatever happened. You cannot be directly involved in these investigations. They are very complex. Then, a quick call to the Bureau's Criminal Justice Information Service Division in West Virginia on April 21 led to an astonishing discovery. McWay was already in jail. He'd been pulled over about 80 miles north of Oklahoma City by an observant Oklahoma State trooper who noticed a missing license plate on his yellow Mercury Marcus. McWay had a concealed weapon and was arrested. It was just 90 minutes after the bombing. 90 minutes after the bombing. 90 minutes after the bombing, McWay was arrested because of an observant Oklahoma State trooper. If you are observant, you'll be able to pick so many things happening within your facility, happening in your organizations, happening around you. If you are observant, you'll be able to pick these things. But if you are not observant, these things will happen, and you are a security professional, and you are there, and you cannot even recall witness, you cannot even provide information, whatever happened. Have you ever seen security officers when you ask them what happened, they tell you, I don't know. The attitude, I don't know. Being observant is very, very, very important when it comes to countering terrorist attacks and terrorist incidents. From there, the evidence began adding up. Agents found traces of the chemicals used in the explosion on McWay's clothes and business card, on which McWay had suspiciously scribed TNT at $5 per stick. I need more. They learned about McWay's extremist ideologies and his anger over the events of Waco 2 years earlier. They discovered that a friend of McWay named Terry Nicholas helped build the bomb, and another man, Michael Fortier, was aware of the bomb plot. Please read about the Lockhart principle. When we talk about investigation, read about the Lockhart principle. Just Google the Lockhart principle. It is one of the principles that investigations are mostly based on this principle that every crime leaves some sort of evidence. Or when two objects touch each other, definitely one material. You read about it. The bombing was quickly solved, but the investigation turned out to be one of the most exhaustive in FBI history. No stone was left unturned to make sure every clue was found and all the culprits identified. By the time it was over, the Bureau had conducted more than 28,000 interviews, followed some 43,000 investigative leads, amassed 3.5 tons of evidence, and reviewed nearly 1 billion pieces of information. You see what we are talking about? It is a work that requires a lot of expertise, and I would like if some of you can develop also into this area and become experts in investigations. You become experts in investigations. It is a very interesting field. In the end, the government that McWay hated and hoped to topple swiftly captured him and convincingly convicted both him and his co-conspirators. Pain, loss, linger for years after a bombing attack. After a bombing attack, the pain and the panic, it stays with the people for many years. And this is one of the objectives of terrorism. They want to leave lasting pain and lasting anguish and lasting damage to their targets that will stay for a long period. Let's look at another case example. A second case study. Pan Am Flight 103. On a cold and ultimately chilling evening just 4 days before Christmas, Pan Am Flight 103 took off from London's Heathrow International Airport en route to New York City. Among the 259 passengers and crew were 189 Americans. They never made it home. Less than 40 minutes into the flight, the plane exploded over the sky above Lockerbie, Scotland, killing everyone on board and 11 scouts on the ground. Until 9/11, it was one of the most lethal acts of air terrorism and one of the largest and most complex acts of international terrorism ever investigated by the FBI. Solving the case required unprecedented international cooperation and hours upon hours of painstaking work. With the mid-air explosion 30,000 feet above sea level, debris rained down over 845 square miles across Scotland. When we talk about these case studies, think about investigation. Think about investigation. Think about investigation. When you think about investigation in terms of whatever is happening in these case studies, you realize it is better we prevent rather than we wait to investigate. It is best we prevent rather than we wait to investigate. FBI agents and international investigators combed the countryside on hands and knees, looking for clues in virtually every blade of grass, eventually turning up thousands of pieces of evidence. They also traversed the globe, interviewing more than 10,000 individuals in dozens of countries. Participating in the investigations were an array of international police organizations, such countries as Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and Great Britain, including Scotland. They participated in the investigating this very complex, dangerous act. Ultimately, forensic specialists from the FBI and the CIA and elsewhere determined that one of the fragments found on the ground, no bigger than a thumbnail, came from the circuit board of a radio cassette player. You see, very interesting, eh? The tiny piece of evidence helped establish that the bomb had been placed inside that radio and tape deck in a piece of luggage. Another small fragment found embedded on a piece of shirt helped identify the type of timer. Sorry, I received a call. I had to attend to a call. However, that tiny piece of evidence helped establish that the bomb had been placed inside that radio and tape deck in a piece of luggage. Another small fragment found embedded in a piece of shirt helped identify the type of timer. Small pieces. Evidence is about very minute pieces that you might not even imagine. And this can provide clues to open a door to the investigation. Now, this evidence led to two Libyan intelligence operatives. In November 1991, the US and Scotland simultaneously indicted the pair for planting the bomb. On January 31, 2001, after years of working to extradite the men and bring the case to trial, Abdel Basset Ali al-Magri was found guilty of the crime. The co-defendant was found not guilty and released. Recently, the Libyan government formally accepted responsibility for the bombing and has agreed to pay nearly $3 billion to the victims of the families. Pan Am Flight 103. I did not want to discuss this with you, but let me just touch on it. The Locard's theory, I want you to read on your own. Professor Edmund Locard's famous theory of exchange can be summed up as every criminal leaves a trace. Locard said in his 1934 publication, La Police et les méthodes scientifiques, Any action of an individual, and obviously the violent actions of crime, cannot occur without leaving a trace. In other words, there is always going to be physical evidence left behind a crime scene by the criminal. The criminal will also take away physical evidence from the crime scene. If you get time, if you get enough funding, please join us and study with us for a course in investigations. You'll also discover very interesting facts, including the Lockhardt's theory. This is the photos of the plane, the Pan Am Flight 103, and you can see how devastating these attacks are. You can see how spectacular. You can see how things happen, and the end of it is death, is destruction, is fear in people, panic, and other issues. Other notable terrorist attacks. Other notable terrorist attacks. Other notable USS Cole bombing on October 12, 2000, two suicide pilots of a small bomb-laden boat pulled alongside the USS Cole at midship. This is a warship. Offered friendly gestures to several crew members and detonated their explosives. During your line of work, never trust anybody, especially those who offer friendly gestures. Those who offer friendly gestures. My fellow security coordinators or security officers or security managers who are attending this class, be very careful with staff who are very friendly to security. If you see a staff who is very friendly to security, especially you as a security manager, you will see the staff always says, hi, he seems like he's very interested to engage you. Know that, start looking at that, pull your antennas, start looking at that person suspiciously. Any person who offers gestures very close to security, wants to stay close to security, it is good, he can provide you information, but be very careful. There is a hidden agenda behind it. That is a secret I'm telling you. The US destroyer en route to the Persian Gulf was making a pre-arranged fuel stop at the port of Aden, Yemen, when the attack occurred. The blast ripped a 40-foot wide hole near the waterline of the Cole, killing 17 US sailors and injuring nearly 40 other crew members. The FBI quickly sent to Yemen more than 100 agents from the Counterterrorism Division, the FBI laboratory, and the various field offices. Director Luz Fritsch arrived soon after to assess the situation and to meet with the president of Yemen. Proceedings before the military commission have been marred in delays and in legal challenges over admissibility of evidence from the torture-aided interrogations of Nashiri and over other circumstances of his trial and detention. Captured in 2002, Nashiri underwent waterboarding, beatings, and confinement in a crate in years of severe custody at the clandestine detention facilities. You can see the call, the USS call. Then we have the 911 attack. The 911 attack. And we will begin by saying we have some planes. September 11, 2001. Tuesday, September 11, 2001. Dawned temperature and nearly cloudless in the eastern United States. Millions of men and women readied themselves for work. Some made their way to the Twin Towers, the signature structures of the World Trade Center complex in New York City. Others went to Arlington, Virginia, to the Pentagon. Across the Potomac River, the United States Congress was back in session. At the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, people began to line up for a White House tour. In Sarasota, Florida, President George W. Bush went for an early morning run. For those heading to an airport, weather conditions could not have been better. for a safe and pleasant journey. Among the travelers were Muhammad Atta and Abdul Aziz Al Omar, who arrived at the airport in Portland. At 8:45 on the morning of September 11, 2001, the United States became a nation transformed. An airliner traveling at hundreds of miles per hour and carrying some 10,000 gallons of jet fuel plowed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. At 9:03, a second airliner hit the South Tower. Fire and smoke billowed upward. Steel, glass, ash, and bodies fell below. The Twin Towers, where up to 50,000 people worked each day, both collapsed less than 90 minutes later. At 9:37 the same morning, a third airliner slammed into the western face of the Pentagon. At 10:03, a fourth airliner crashed in a field in southern Pennsylvania. It had been aimed at the United States Capitol, or the White House, and was forced down by heroic passengers armed with the knowledge that America was under attack. More than 2,600 people died in the World Trade Center. 125 died at Pentagon. 256 died on the 4 planes. The death toll surpassed that at Pearl Harbor in December 1941. This immeasurable pain was inflicted by 19 young Arabs acting at the behest of Islamist extremists headquartered in distant Afghanistan. Some had been in the United States for more than a year, mixing with the rest of the population. Though 4 had training as pilots, most were not well educated. Most spoke English poorly, some hardly at all. In groups of 4 or 5, carrying with them only small knives, box cutters, and cans of mace or pepper spray, they had hijacked the 4 planes and turned them into deadly guided missiles. Why did they do this? How was the attack planned and conceived? How did the US government fail to anticipate and prevent it? What can we do in the future to prevent similar acts of terrorism? Those are hard questions. Those are very hard questions. Those are very hard questions. And as security professionals, we should think about how did it happen? How were they able to stage these attacks? How was the US government unable to see that this is likely to happen? How did they move ahead of the intelligence community? How are they able to achieve this? And it was a coordinated attack. 4 planes hijacked at the same time. This one was something that was beyond belief. In all, 2,977 people, not counting the 19 hijackers, lost their lives, most of them in New York. All 246 passengers and crew aboard the 4 planes were killed. At the Twin Towers, 2,606 people died, then or later of injuries. At the Pentagon, 125 people were killed. The youngest victim was 2-year-old Christine Lee Hanson, who died on one of the planes with her parents, Peter and Sue. The oldest was 82-year-old Robert Norton, who was on another plane with his wife Jacqueline en route to a wedding. We said terrorists, when we talk about terroristics, it can happen to anybody, it can happen anytime, it can happen to any target, it can happen in any country. You see, it claimed the life of a very young child who was actually 2-year-old Christine Lee, and also it claimed the life of an 82-year-old man, Robert Norton. Take note of the characteristics of terrorism and always remember that. And then when the first plane struck, an estimated 17,400 people were in the towers. Nobody survived above the impact zone in the North Tower, but 18 managed to escape from the floors above the impact zone in the South Tower. Citizens of 77 different countries were among the casualties. New York City lost 441 first responders. 441 died in the attack. Thousands of people were injured or later developed illness connected to the attacks, including firefighters who had worked in the toxic debris. I think we have spoken enough about that as a case study. Another case study, let's look at anthrax, or what we call Ameritrax investigation. Soon after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, letters laced with anthrax began appearing in the US mail. 5 Americans were killed and 17 were sickened in what became the worst biological attacks in the US history. Remember, we spoke about biological attacks. The ensuing investigation by the FBI and its partners, codenamed Ameritrax, has been one of the largest and most complex in the history of law enforcement. One of the largest and complex investigations in the history of law enforcement. In August 2008, Department of Justice and FBI officials announced a breakthrough in the case and released documents and information showing that charges were about to be brought against Bruce Evans, who took his own life before those charges could be filed. On February 19, 2010, the Justice Department, the FBI, and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service formally concluded the investigation into the 201 anthrax attacks and issued an investigation summary. The task force, which consisted of roughly 25 to 30 full-time investigators from the FBI, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and other law enforcement agencies, as well as federal prosecutors from the Districts of Columbia and the Justice Department Counterterrorism Section, expended hundreds of thousands of investigators' work hours on this case. Their efforts involved more than 10,000 witness interviews on 6 different continents, the execution of 8 test searches, and the recovery of more than 6,000 items of potential evidence during the course of investigation. The case involved the issuance of more than 5,750 grand jury subpoenas and the collection of 5,730 environmental samples from 60 site locations. In addition, new scientific methods were developed that ultimately led to the break in the case, methods that could have a far-reaching impact on future investigation. We have come to the end of this presentation about case studies, and the purpose was to highlight how investigation of terrorist attacks is a very complex process. It needs time, it needs resources, it needs expertise to get to the bottom line or to reach to the truth of the matter and to arrest perpetrators. You have seen the events both in Kenya and the events both in the US, how things happen and how these investigations are carried out. You have also seen how terrorism is dynamic. You have also seen how terrorists move with time until they are ahead of the intelligence community and even the security operatives. So you, as a private security individual, or you as a government state security person, you have always to be proactive. You have always to be on your lookout. You have to pull your antennas 24 hours every day in everything that you do. You must be on the lookout. Remember, we have said we are under threat from Al-Shabaab. It will never end. I can tell you it will never end for us. So you have to be always vigilant, monitor these areas. If you are in charge of security teams, make sure that the security team is working. Be proactive. Make sure that they are patrolling. Those small acts can play a big role in preventing terrorism. Thank you so much. We are going to move to the next presentation, which is our strategy in fighting terrorism. Thank you.